Well, first of all, I love the area. I guess I'll start this off. As a young boy, I spent a lot of time in Marlborough, New Hampshire, right next door. Actually, my first job as a teenager was working at a camp called Camp Glenbrook. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
You may have noticed my first TV ad. I stood in front of a sugar house that I helped build up there, which is still in existence. So this area is a place that has a special place in my heart. After I finished serving in the military, it's definitely the reason why I decided to make New Hampshire my permanent home. So a little bit about myself. Jim Lawrence, served 3 terms in the New Hampshire State House, also a veteran, small business owner, proud parent of 8 children, husband. I got into this race because I was fearful for the future of my children. And I saw President Barack Obama leading this country down a path where we had a failed foreign policy. The economy wasn't going well. We had issues with government accountability, the IRS, Veterans Administration, and I saw Representative Ann Custer supporting him 95% of the time, and I didn't see the candidates running on the Republican ticket talking about these issues as much as I felt they should be. As I looked out there, I saw a field with Representative Marilinda Garcia. I served in the House with Representative Marilinda Garcia. However, as I got into this race, I confirmed what I initially thought. The voters are telling me. I'm not sure that Representative Marilinda Garcia can relate to the average voter. She hasn't had the opportunity to own a home, pay a mortgage, make educational choices for her children, pay college tuition, be a small business owner, make payroll, deal with over-regulation of small business, and pay business profits tax or business enterprise tax. These are the issues that the voters say they want a congressman to be well-versed in before they go to Washington. Conversely, with Senator Gary Lambert, he's a veteran like myself. However, I'm hearing the voters tell me he voted against certain core conservative issues like regional greenhouse gas initiative. When I was in the State House, I stood firm against Reggie. He also voted for Common Core. A critical campaign platform position for me is to have locally controlled education decisions and not have Washington, D.C. dictate to how we educate our children here in New Hampshire. So once again, Senator Lambert and I disagree on a lot of the key issues that I feel are important to this country and this state.
I'm going to dive right in. We're going to talk about guns.
Okay.
And it's pretty clear from your pro-gun rights stance. But can you talk, and look, we all want our world and our neighborhoods and our communities to be safer places. Are there any practical common sense approaches or legislative responses that you'd like to kickstart, if elected, that would achieve that, would make our world a safer place, and yet protect and not infringe on the rights of gun owners?
I just said I was a parent of 8. I obviously care about the safety of our communities a great deal. I'm also the son of a 34-plus year law enforcement veteran. My father was a police officer. So these are things that are very near and dear to my heart. I think there are things that we're doing in response to safety, particularly as it relates to children. For example, I can no longer walk into my children's school anymore without gaining access. The doors are locked. In my town, there are resource safety officers that are in the school, so there's a responder in the school on site. These are the types of things that I think that are good. These are good provisions to help protect our society. As you said earlier, I am pro-Second Amendment. I do believe that the Second Amendment provides protections for our rights to bear arms. And I'm also going to add, being the son of a law enforcement veteran, that most violent crimes that are committed with firearms are committed with firearms that are illegally possessed, not legally possessed. So these types of laws are not going to protect citizens. We need to enforce the citizens that are the laws. We need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. And you know what? Let's be frank. We need to start taking a serious look at how we're dealing with mental health issues in this country, because a lot of times by targeting mental health issues, I know there's been some recent tragedies that have occurred, and mental health has been a factor in there. So we need to start targeting mental health to help protect our society as well.
What does that mean to target mental health?
Well, we need to start seriously taking a look at it. I mean, one of the unfortunate consequences of President Barack Obama's position has been to completely to ignore a lot of mental health issues in this country. If you look at what his priorities were in his first budgetary cycles, he's not really addressing it seriously, and people may not be getting the help that they need.
How would you change that in terms of support for mental health issues?
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to ignore the issue, which is what we're doing now. What we need to do is we need to take a look at what the mental health issues that we're facing now. I mean, I bring a little bit of perspective on this from my household as well. My wife happens to be a special education director. So we have a lot of conversations about what current government policies are doing in preventing everyday people and everyday parents, because a lot of these people are children, how government is throwing up roadblocks and preventing them from dealing with mental health issues the way that we should be supporting them.
So what are some of these roadblocks? I'm a little bit vague on them. I don't quite understand. What kind of roadblocks are preventing parents from seeking the truth? Is it money? Is it programs? Is it, I don't know,
well, it's
paperwork? Is it,
there are a lot of factors, but let's bring up a real-life example. Obamacare has been unveiled, and there's a lot of discussion about what Obamacare does. One of the things Obamacare does do is it doesn't cover a lot of the mental health issues the same way that other insurance did previously. You know, this is a real-life impact. This is something that I call, we always throw around the term unintended consequences. This is an unintended consequence, a negative one, that the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, has brought up. There are a host of other examples of government intervention, and that's what I'm going to call it, or obstruction from people getting the mental health support that they need.
Just one more question to follow up on the gun situation. Do you support any additional measures on the background checks side of the laws that are on the books now? Expanding those in any way? Or is it sufficient?
I don't support any expansion of background checks as they stand now. We need to enforce the laws that are on the books now before we start looking for other laws or additional laws. I'm going to go, I look at my conversations with my father, who spent many, many years as a law enforcement officer, and I've actually looked at the statistics. It's mind-boggling. Even in the inner cities across this country, most of these violent crimes are committed by criminals who do not possess legally owned firearms. We can't target the law-abiding citizens of the country and expect to reduce gun violence that way. We need to start targeting criminals.
So does that mean a reallocation of resources to put more money at enforcing those laws?
Well, most law enforcement happens at the local level, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that, Congress can do little to impact that, but I would be in favor of...
It could do block grants, couldn't it?
I'm sorry, what was that?
It could do block grants.
Yes, it could, and that could be a way that could assist in the law enforcement community in doing that. But I would defer to the law enforcement community to let us know how we can help. I'm not a big proponent of having Washington dictate to local control how they conduct their business.
Moving a little farther away, there are obviously a lot of ongoing issues in Central America that are causing the current influx of undocumented immigrants into the country at the border with Mexico. Do you want to give us an idea of how, if you were elected, you would hope to address those issues and also the sort of symptoms that come from that at the border?
Absolutely. Well, immigration, first and foremost, what I would be a proponent of is securing the border first. Before we talk about anything else, we keep kicking the can in a row. We need to secure the border. We need to build a fence. We need to augment our border patrol with the necessary resources they need to secure our border. Use the National Guard if necessary. But that has to be accomplished first. We can do all the reforms we want to, but without securing the border, they're meaningless.
What about the issues in the countries in Central America that are actually driving people to want to come to the United States and escape that?
Well, we certainly need to use our foreign policy outreach, and I'm just going to say this right up front. I believe that President Barack Obama's foreign policy is a failure. It's the worst foreign policy in decades. It's making our enemies become more emboldened. It's hurting us both internally and externally. Our allies don't feel like they can count on us. This is just another example of where our foreign policy position is failing us. Yeah, we should be engaging more with these countries where the illegals are pouring in from and seeing what we can do to rectify or to alleviate the problem right in the home country. Some ideas that have been thrown around that I would be a proponent of is that we should look at having some resources in the embassies of these host countries to facilitate having people gain access to the country in a legal fashion as opposed to just migrating to the border. We should also work with those host countries to try and come up with diplomatic solutions and work with humanitarian organizations as also. Maybe there is an option or an opportunity to provide safe zones within those countries with the host nation and with humanitarian organizations to alleviate some of the pressure for the situation right now. But I'm going to go back to my first question. I'm at my first position. We need to secure the border. That has to be our first priority.
What do you mean by host countries?
Well, the countries where the current influx of illegals are coming in from now.
Okay.
Going back to immigration, beyond securing the border. So we secure the border and people aren't just crossing from, I presume you mean the Mexican border, primarily. So we secure the border, but there are people who are already here who pose an issue. There are people, not only the children that we've seen in recent weeks, who are coming in and waiting to be processed, but people who are already in our country through various means. How do you propose to deal with those situations?
Well, this situation didn't get like this overnight. The reason why I'm saying it's so important to secure the border first is because we have to stop the bleeding, we have to stop the situation from getting any worse. Once we've done that, we can start to target some of these issues. Some ideas that I've been supportive of, I would be an advocate of beefing up our immigration courts in order to provide asylum hearings for people in a quicker fashion. Whether we use retired judges or augment them with some kind of other emergency provision, I would support that. Because right now, we've got people that are essentially on administrative amnesty awaiting a hearing that they're legally entitled to. So that's one of the provisions that I would be in support of. Once we've had a determination as to whether we're going to grant asylum or not, if they're not granted asylum, I would be a proponent of deporting them back to their home nation or their nation of origin.
Do you want to touch on some other obviously a lot of foreign policy challenges sort of popping up, seems like every day. Do you want to touch on some more major ones, including what's going on in Gaza right now and Ukraine and Iraq?
Well, I'll handle all three of them. Okay. How about that? I'll start with Israel. This is a situation where Israel is attempting to defend their country and their citizens. If we had a bordering nation lobbing rockets into our country, I don't think anyone in this country would be questioning whether we should defend ourselves and defend our citizens. I think the same thing is true for Israel. Israel has a right to defend its nation. It has a right to defend its citizens. And we as their ally, we should support them in defending themselves from Hamas. Situation with the Ukraine. Once again, I'm going to go back to foreign policy. We've had a very weak defense posture, and we have a failed foreign policy. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that our enemies, or those who do not have our best interests at heart, should be no surprise that they would stand up and oppose us and thumb their nose at us. Hillary Clinton just came out and attacked the administration, saying that foreign policy is a weakness, challenged some decisions that were made with Syria. I agree with her. We should not be taking these weak stances when it comes to foreign policy like this, because it only emboldens our enemies to do things that are against our interests. Right now, Putin does not take us seriously, and unfortunately, if we don't change that soon, he's going to do something that we're going to be forced to address, and that's the worst thing. The worst thing we can do is do nothing. In migrating into ISIS in Iraq, we cannot afford to have another state-sponsored terrorist organization to emerge. We just can't afford that, because no matter what we do, they will never stop. They will keep going, and they will go to the point where they come back and they harm our interests abroad and maybe even at home. We have to stop it now. Airstrikes, good start. I wish that we had gotten involved a little bit earlier. It's not going to be enough. I'm not advocating putting boots on the ground in Iraq, but we do have to have a stronger military response, increasing airstrikes, more coordination with advisors on the ground in order to help stave off the emergence of ISIS. It's something that we can't afford.
Is the Ukraine our ally or just a country?
The Ukraine is an ally of the United States.
So should
President
we be
Obama has
supporting
stated
them the way
that
we
publicly.
support Israel?
I believe that we should support Ukraine in their ability to defend themselves and remain independent.
What should we do to show that support? What steps should we take?
I'm not an advocate of putting troops into Ukraine, if that's what you're asking me. I guess one of my tenets is that I'm not an advocate for using our military as a police force for the world's issues. However, I think it's good that the EU and the president have put stronger sanctions in place. It's a start in the right direction, but we need to have a much stronger defense posture. We need to have stronger foreign policy put in place, and we need to send clear messages to our enemies and allies alike that when we say something, we mean business. President Barack Obama has drawn too many meaningless lines in the sand without consequences. He did it in Syria. He's continuing on that path, and we need to stop it now.
What's your personal threshold for when we do insert ourselves into an international crisis beyond safety, national security? Is there something else that would be okay with you in terms of allowing us to potentially put boots on the ground or to insert ourselves into a conflict?
Other than national interest and national security, no.
So if Syria is using chemical weapons against its civilians, that's not a situation we should interfere in?
Did we involve ourselves when Iraq used chemical weapons on their citizens? I mean, I'm not going to make you answer that. The answer is no. No one wants people to suffer in the world, and I don't want to stand by and watch people suffer in the world. But if I'm elected to Congress, I have a duty to protect the Americans' interests first. And I can't, in good conscience, being a veteran, justify going to war because of the ill action of one leader within his own country's borders.
Switch gears again.
All right.
A few months ago, we had the new leader of public service in New Hampshire here for another board meeting. He
Okay.
painted a rather gloomy picture of spiraling energy costs and lack of capacity for things like natural gas in particular. There's a nuclear power plant that's going to close in our neighborhood at the end of the year. And we have this growing reliance on natural gas, and as I just mentioned, no capacity. Something's got to give there. Going forward, what forms of energy would you endorse using in terms of energy that produces electricity for this state and this part of the country in particular?
Well, first and foremost, I'm going to say that the Keystone Pipeline is a good idea, that its time has come. I think it's time that we have policy that supports Keystone Pipeline. It kind of feeds into what we were talking about earlier with foreign policy. We need to start weaning ourselves off of a dependence with particularly Middle Eastern sources of oil. My role, or my view on what the federal government should be doing can be easily communicated in one thing. I believe in a smaller, more accountable government. Now, how does that apply to energy policy? I think the government should get involved only when it's absolutely necessary. I believe that local communities have the best voice and the best ability to make smart decisions for their community.
So, but if the best decision for a community relies on somebody else running a pipeline, then how does that come about?
Well, areas like the Keystone Pipeline, I agree that the federal government does need to get involved to facilitate that. That's why I started off with that. As a small business owner, I understand that energy is the economic. It's an economic engine. It's required for everything that we do. So we definitely need to work hard to have cheap, reliable sources of energy, and I'd prefer that they make us less dependent on foreign sources.
You're for or against Northern Pass?
I'm against Northern Pass.
Why?
I'm against Northern Pass because it comes at a price that's too high for our state, particularly the economy in the North Country. The plan as it stands right now would be to run these wires, high-tension wires, above ground with super towers that are much, much greater in height than the tree line. It would cut straight through the North Country that's relying so vitally on tourist dollars. And currently, the plan as it's laid out would not be in the best interest of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire people and New Hampshire citizens. Also, I might add that the way it's laid out is the benefit to the New Hampshire people is marginal. High cost, low return. I have to support the people of New Hampshire.
So, one of the major issues for pretty much every candidate that we're talking to this election cycle is the Affordable Care Act. You are a proponent of repealing that. What would you propose in its place to guarantee access and affordable health care?
You know, it's a good question. As a small business owner, I personally saw the struggles with providing health care insurance for my employees as costs spiraled out of control, much I'm sure you've witnessed here yourself. As I campaign, one of the interesting things that I'm finding is whether I'm in Colebrook, Claremont, Salem, Wyndham, all across the state, 90% of the people I talk to, whether they were in favor of the Affordable Care Act before it was implemented or not, are opposed to it now. And I'll tell you why they're opposed to it. Many people in this state were promised that they'd be able to keep their health care, their doctors, and most of them, that did not end up being the case. I was in Bethlehem the other day. I was talking to Peter. His daughter could no longer see the specialist that she was seeing once they went on Obamacare. She's left the country to get treatment now. It's not America. Obamacare forced us into a narrow network. There's a county where there are no health care providers and no hospitals that are currently covered in this narrow network. You know, unfortunately, there was a system in place. May not have been perfect, but what I'm hearing from the citizens of this state is that it was better than what we have now. What I would be a proponent of or an advocate for is the first thing we have to do is we have to introduce more competition into the system. We need to get more insurance carriers to come into the state and provide more competition so that people have more choice and we can potentially get rid of this narrow network. I would also be an advocate for allowing the citizens to be able to cross state lines in order to get their insurance. But right now the system is broken. It was broken before. The Affordable Health Care Act has broken it even further. And we need to restore at least to the level that it was before the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare was passed. And we need to take time to put in smart provisions to help fix some of the problems that Obamacare was supposed to fix in the first place.
So how would you foster more competition? I mean, right now with the marketplace in New Hampshire that left the North Country without hospitals on a plan there, we've got for 2015 now 5 providers who are coming into the state.
I hope they do.
Is that not more competition?
I hope it happens. It hasn't happened yet.
What other ways would you foster more competition?
Well, I hope that happens because that's definitely a step in the right direction. But we need to make sure that materializes and we need to make sure that it happens. But as I said before, I mean, right now we got a situation where citizens in New Hampshire can't cross state lines to get health insurance. That's a big factor. It happens to be done at the state level, but I would be an advocate for that.
When you say that you want, on taxes, when you say that you want to hold the IRS accountable, do you mean in general you would favor sort of increased regulation of the IRS or increased, I guess, oversight of it, or do you mean specifically related to the accusations that it targeted political organizations?
Okay. We haven't talked about my position on taxes yet, so I'll kind of answer your question and also let you know how I feel about taxes in general. As a starting point, the 8,000 plus page tax code we have now is out of control. It's too complicated. Nobody can understand it. Unfortunately, it enables the IRS to be able to target individuals, which probably helps or fosters the environment as to why we have an accountability issue to begin with. So the first thing that I would want to do is to try and streamline that process. Let's face it. The American people deserve to have a tax code that they can understand. If I'm going to pay my taxes, I should know what I'm paying. I'm a small business owner. I understand complicated tax situations. I pay, a lot more money to CPAs than I'd like to every year to help me understand a tax code that nobody can understand. So that would be the first thing that I would want to target. Make a simpler and fairer tax code so that the people can understand the tax code. If everybody understood the tax code, it makes it a lot less likely that that organization would be targeting individuals. Because right now, I don't think anybody in this room could say that they know everything that's in the tax code. I bet you every CPA probably couldn't tell you everything that's in the tax code either. That's a problem. I would be an advocate for a flatter and fairer tax code. As you start to flatten the tax code, now you can start removing some of these exemptions and loopholes that are making up this 8,000 plus page tax code. That would be my first target to try and fix the situation. Now I'm going to get to the government accountability position. I think we have a lack of government accountability in Washington, D.C. We've seen it with the IRS, we've seen it with the VA, we've seen it with the NSA, we've seen it with the CIA now. It's got to stop. Let's face facts. We the people only have limited voices in Washington. Our representatives, our congressmen and our senators are supposed to be that voice. I don't hear them jumping up and down and standing up and saying, hey, we need to do something about government accountability. We do need to do something about government accountability. And if I'm elected to be a congressman, I will go to Washington, D.C. and hold Washington, D.C. accountable to the people of this state.